Now let's bring in political analyst Dumsane Dembe to help us make sense of that January 8th statement. Good afternoon, Dumsane, and thank you very much for your time. There's so much actually to discuss. I mean, from Stan Mathabata prematurely committing branches of Limpopo province to President Ramaphosa's campaign. That was very interesting, but I'll be structured and start with the President's address. What did you make of the priorities for 2022 for the African National Congress?
Well, good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers as well. I think it has been a very interesting speech, but if I were to pull out a few things that are quite interesting, number one, I think the ANC is battling to distinguish itself between being a political party and being a ruling party. The January 8th statement, traditionally, it speaks to what the ANC ought to do without necessarily being the ruling party. I think what the speech battles to do has been to distinguish itself between being the ruling party and being an organization. And I think to a large extent, the speech itself, it speaks to the ANC being the ruling party, being a government. But what the ANC needs the most at this point in time is to generate itself, empower itself as an organization before it can think of doing better at the state level. So I think that opportunity has been missed, except for one thing, that that the president said they are going to establish a renewal, committee within the ANC, which is going to work on the 2030 vision for the ANC and how to get there. But besides that, I think a struggle to draw the line between the organizational priorities and the being a government of the day.
That is honestly the age-old problem of conflation of party and state. And perhaps one could even argue that most of the parties struggle with this. If we're going to talk about the Democratic Alliance, we've seen it happen several times, even during Mmusi Maimane's time, where we saw him overstepping when there was that whole Patricia de Lille matter, where he would speak on matters that were in fact matters that should be confined to government. So it seems to be something that continuously is a struggle even for the African National Congress. I mean, I heard them speak of at least most appealing to the president to ensure there are prosecutions. I mean, that goes even beyond conflation of party and state, but separation here, because the NPA is the body you need to be appealing to if we're talking about prosecutions emanating from the State Capture Commission, wouldn't you say?
Look, I think for the ANC, that shouldn't be difficult. I understand that the reference are making to the DA, but here's the situation. The ANC has been in decline for so many years, and this decline is primarily drawn from within factional politics. That's number one. There are a few examples that we can mention. If you look at the behavior of former President Jacob Zuma from KZN, it's as if he's running a parallel ANC. On the other hand, there are the likes of Kalni House, you've got the likes of S. Mahashulu that are also seemingly running a parallel ANC. If you look at how the ANC performs in the local government election, it's quite an appalling for the liberation movement of the stature of the ANC. But what it seems to me is the difficulty of the leadership of the ANC is to address internal matters. But even if you look at the State Capture Commission, the State Capture Commission is nothing but the ANC outsourcing its inability to deal with internal ill-disciplinary issues and corruption into a state institution wherein the rest of us have to pay. So the primary need for the ANC is to work on its own internal affairs, is to strengthen affairs. It will not do any better as a government unless its internal affairs are in order. Here's one example as the last year. In this January 8th statement, they are talking about building the capacity of the state to perform better. But they can't do that unless the ANC itself is in a better capacity. So what it is missing in this January 8th statement, which has been the case in the last few years, is the unwillingness or inability or the fear to address its own internal weaknesses. so that it can become a better government. It can't be a good government unless it sorts its internal affairs proper.
Perhaps to take you back to that state capture argument. I mean, we saw, or at least heard from the president today, he said at the very least they will implement whatever recommendations are confined to the political party. But if we went back to that state capture report, all that we saw there with the commission is that when they spoke of party political funding, they were in essence speaking about the African National Congress insofar as EOH is concerned, which talks to the late Jeff Mokaba, as well as they didn't even touch, if I'm correct, they didn't even touch on Jenna McKay perhaps donating that 1 million to Zizi Kodwa. They also touched on Blackhead, that's Edwin Sodi, his donations to the African National Congress and Bosasa. And then the recommendations that we saw from that state capture report were that they should merely criminalize the donations to political parties if there is an expectation to be awarded contracts. But we all know that would be difficult to police because there's nobody who would actually express that if I donate to a political party, I am looking to then be awarded contracts. So really, what more could the president have spoken about insofar as correcting some of the things that they've mentioned in the state capture report? Because there was very little in part one that concerns the ANC.
No, there's actually the whole State Capture Commission, the report, even the ones that we have not read, the ones that are still coming, part 2 and 3, they are basically about the ANC. Remember that the ANC has been empowered, political official, executive official, as well as administrative head and supply chain officers, they are mainly drawn from the ruling party. This is why I said to you earlier on that the State Capture Commission was nothing short of the ANC outsourcing its own inability to govern itself to a state commission. And nothing of the ANC can be sorted out by a public state commission. It has to be driven, from within. Now, here's a problem. The state capture, its outcome, the report and all of that, for its fruitful implementation, it will depend on the functional state agencies, which include the National Prosecuting Authority, the police, the justice system, the ability to investigate and prosecute. So if you look at all that is being said, at the end of the day, the State Capture Commission was nothing short of the ruling faction within the ANC trying to annihilate the faction that they were trying to deal with. In this particular case, the faction that was associated with Jacob Zuma. So it's part and parcel of the power contestations within the ANC that we ended up with the State Capture Commission. So even if, I'm sure you have, a part of your reports that I've seen was Gwede Mantashe saying that this State Capture Commission report must not be used to deal with the political adversaries within the ANC. But the fact is, if people are found to have abused state resources, they then must be prosecuted, which in the internal politics of the ANC, it will be treated as using state resources to deal with political adversaries. So
but if the shoe fits, I mean, many, like you say, that if state resources were used and you abuse state resources, you must be held accountable, irrespective of which faction benefits in the ANC as a result of your prosecution if it leads to that. It should be immaterial that who benefits if there's a certain faction that is looking to now ascend to certain positions. It should be immaterial. But then the president still maintains really what this was an exercise to root out corruption. Talk to me about the renewal program that we keep hearing from the ANC and that the president has spoken about, saying, you know what, it is a difficult process, but you cannot speak unity at all costs. If there are those that have done wrong things within the state, then you must somehow not unite with them.
Okay, two things, Nomfundo. Number one is that what happens within the ruling party gets duplicated in state affairs. So if there are factional politics in the ANC that leads into the rule by the dominant faction, it means the state apparatus which are run by the same ruling party. That is what is going to happen. So you are going to likely to see selective prosecution that come out of the State Capture Commission, because it's not the dominant rule of law or principles in the organization that matter, but the dominant, faction of the day. Now, to your second point about the renewal and all of this, my take is simple. I think the ANC needs to get rid from within its affairs, or thinking for that matter, of these terminologies of renewal, rebirth, going back into this glorious past, because they don't work. What the ANC needed, the strategic realignment with the new dynamics that society such as South Africa is experiencing. So I'm not sure if after 94, the ANC can pinpoint a historical moment that says this was our glorious moment, we are going back into that. So all these terminologies of renewal, rebirth, that this renewal commission, I don't think the ANC needs that. What it needs is to strategize, to realign, to organize itself in alliance, in alignment with what the new society is experiencing at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. He also touched on democratic centralism and actually spoke quite extensively on ill discipline within the party and the need to deal with it decisively this time around. I mean, it was a different tone. The president has been criticized for the longest time for being a very soft man, if you will. What did you make of that? Because we understand that now it's the road. He's somehow putting together some sort of a campaign speech ahead of that elective conference, whether we like it or not. And we heard a tougher Cyril Ramaphosa, wouldn't you say?
Look, not necessarily. It's for him, it's a necessary rhetoric, but also, Namfundo, we must keep in mind that this is not necessarily the speech of the president. The January 8th statement is actually the statement of the National Executive Committee. It's just that in its presentation, it assumes the character of the leader at that point in time. So this was actually the National Executive Committee speaking to its members. My take on this speech, I think they made a fundamental flaw. It's a missed opportunity, because what the ANC at this point in time does not necessarily need. It needs is to organize itself, build its internal capacity and ability. And to this extent, it needs a very powerful collective leadership. But beyond that, when it comes to its membership, it needs a membership and the leadership which is very disciplined internally, which is very cohesive in terms of the ideological and historical stance of the ANC as an organization. So for me, 90% of the speech should have been directed at strengthening the capacity and the ability of the ANC internally. And I think that opportunity has been missed at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. And then let's touch on the peripheral issues or matters. We know that this January 8th statement took place against the backdrop of a campaign year or an elective conference year. We heard Stan Mathabatha, he was the first to speak. He was supposed to open it, welcome everybody to Limpopo, but he went on to commit the branches of Limpopo province to this campaign of the current president for his second term. What did you make of that? Because many have criticized him for having spoken prematurely, because he spoke to our reporter a bit earlier, actually, before taking to the podium, and stated exactly that they will be supporting the second term. Did he speak prematurely, or we shouldn't be naive? This is the time to actually express and nail your colors to the mast.
No, I don't think he speak prematurely, because in any event, the choice of Limpopo to host this January 8th statement was primarily motivated by this interest to position President Ramaphosa to serve his second term. So he did not speak prematurely. And keep in mind, Nomfundo, that in most cases, when a politician within an organization makes public pronouncements, these are not necessarily his personal or her personal position. These are positions that have been discussed, deliberated, and agreed upon in dark corners when they plan on how to capture the power of the organization. So what he did, he was speaking on behalf of a particular collective that wants Cyril Ramaphosa to serve a second term. So it's part of the
particular collective. Sorry? I mean, when you say he was speaking on behalf of a particular collective, but we know that at this point it has to be somebody speaking on behalf of the branches, and they have not set to nominate as yet. The process has not been opened. So which collective was he representing in that respect? Because many are saying it's premature in the sense that right now they are seized with regional conferences. They are busy now looking for names for those that must sit on the REC. They're going to then finalize the process of PECs. And as it stands, Stan Mathabata, there's talks that possibly he seeks a third term, but as it stands, his 2 terms are done. So if he goes and commits a Limpopo or Limpopo branches to the campaign of the president for a second term, will he in fact be the man that leads Limpopo to that elective conference? Because what actually he was stating was that I'm committing a province beyond my term. He won't be there if we were to say that he's not running for a third term.
Okay, here's the situation. Let's not fall into this propaganda that says the branches of the ANC are the basic unit of the ANC. They determine who becomes the president or not. The branches of the ANC, they take instruction from certain factional conclusions. So if you want, the premier of Limpopo was speaking in advancing the particular interest of a particular faction that he belongs to. And in most cases, this is how individuals become leaders within the ANC. When a few people determine that they want Cyril Ramaphosa to be president or Jacob Zuma to be president, and they go and mobilize branches to that effect. It's not the other way around. I know that the rhetoric says the branches decide and they...
Correct, yes, and their constitution. You know that rhetoric, Amandla Semaseben, that's what they constantly say to us. And for the longest time, reporting on the build-up to an elective conference, we somehow see the PEC emerging as those that lead the very branches. But it shouldn't be that way. So I wanted you to actually go there, that our branches, in fact, the ones with power, if you're going to have a Stan Mathabata going to commit them when they haven't even sat and told him what is their view as yet?
You see, historically, the branches of the ANC were established, I'm talking pre-94, they were established and consolidated to carry the messages that came from the ANC leadership on what needs to be done. And this is when the issues of a general aid statement also emerged because the ANC was spared. So historically, to put it bluntly when I'm on foot, is that the branches of the ANC were established to serve the leadership of the ANC and not the other way around. And it's just that historical noble quest to use branches to communicate to everyone in society in the pre-democracy in this country. Post-democracy, they have been manipulated to serve the interests of the political elite that wants to assume leadership status in the ruling party. And that is what we see at this point in time. There's no person in a position who will go to a branch and say, would you want to be the president of the ANC? They go and tell them and mobilize them and galvanize them to support what the elite leadership in that particular place has chosen to align with to become the next president.
Dumsani, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Just talk to me about the SACP, Blade Nzimande, in closing. Blade Nzimande's utterances or statement where he went on to talk about that third hand, that we've got counter-revolutionaries within the political party, that this time the enemy is within. What did you make of that?
He's partly right and wrong at the same time. I think the destruction of the ANC has been driven by the liberal agenda, which wants to curtail the liberation agenda. So targeting the ANC makes a perfect sense. And next to that, the there are people within the ANC that are aligned to this liberal agenda, which seeks to curtail the liberation agenda. But having said that, I don't think the SACP in the last donkey years has played a very strategic role in directing the liberation agenda in this country to the ANC. I think the elite leadership of the SACP, possibly including Blade, they've used this alliance to position themselves in a way that they find themselves in senior position in cabinet. So it's a bigger issue than that.
No, it's a very difficult one when we speak of the SACP and actually the continuance of that alliance. And as much as they say there are detractors that don't want them to continue, and Zingisa Losi speaks of the reconfiguration of that alliance, but really if you look at the heart of it, this is a communist party that must have a different agenda to that of a ruling party, which is more centrist in its policy formulation. If nothing else, sometimes they can even be right-leaning with so many neoliberal policies that they always criticize as the SACP and COSATU, but somehow these three, which should represent distinct positions within the political space, they somehow think as the three, they continue to actually push for the same agenda. It's a very interesting one that deserves a bigger conversation with you, Dumsani, sometime soon. But thank you very much. That was political analyst Dumsani Tembe, just giving us analysis following that crucial, important statement by the president, just giving marching orders to the African National Congress for year 2022.